Cool. Hopefully this should be working now. How can I see? You're telling your followers that you've started a live story. Right. There we go. Cool. Right, I will wait like a minute for everyone to start joining. And then I will do a proper introduction. Oops, we've got some more. I feel like I've just ran in here. Constantly running to do stuff. Right, I will give it a minute. I can see like quite a few people have joined, which is fun. This is like, I think this is potentially the first time I've done like a live by myself. So riding solo. So this is quite fun. So hopefully some of you stick around. Right, there's like quite a few people on here, so I'm going to just proper introduction. So hi everyone. This is, I hope you can hear me actually, because these are on. But so if the audio is out, just let me know. Start again. So hi, this is my event for Fashion Open Studio for Fashion Revolution Week. It is basically going to be a talk about a lot of this random stuff that's in front of me. So design development talk, and then afterwards I will be doing a Q&A on upcycling. I've taken like a number of different questions prior, which I've gone through in detail, but you're more than welcome to drop questions on the live, which I can just about see from the distance that it's set up here. So yeah, I've watched a few of the bits throughout the day. I know Patrick McDowell was just before me. There are some great things this evening, so I would keep in touch with like what's on the schedule. But I am doing this all by myself. So right, I'm going to start. It's really hard without anyone else around. Basically, I wanted to talk about the importance of craft, design development. So I recently released 2 bodies of work. So I released a collection in February under London Fashion Week, and then I released a capsule about 3-4 weeks later, which was handbags. I wanted to specifically talk about the handbags because I actually began working on them before, well, just before the collection really. They took longer. Just because there was more, I suppose, more textiles, more to consider. And that's what I wanted to discuss with this and break down, because when you, I suppose people within design will understand, but people outside of design don't necessarily know how long it takes to make something, or how much craft goes into making it, and all of these tests and trials are usually disposed of, reused, reutilized, upcycled into something else. They get lost and forgotten, and I thought it might be quite informative to talk through a couple of bits and bobs. So I'll talk about this to start with. So this is probably the easiest to break down to show you. Obviously it hasn't got a handle on it. This is a little baguette. So this is made from upcycled dead stock vegan leather supplied by Ultra Fabrics. It's lined with a bamboo silk. The metals are from a supplier which I trust. They are new, but I trust that they can be reused at end of life cycle. Same with the little metal studs that you've got on the feet. But there's a vast amount of craft that went into this. And before it got to this point, it went through a million different variations, which started last summer, I would say. So I got donated, because normally when it comes to upcycling, I get donated fabric sporadically. So I get donated at different times of the year in different quantities. I got the opportunity to get hold of some dead stock vegan leather, which, as far as I'm aware, was for a private client and was going to be used for upholstery. So it's going to be used for like sofas, things like that. So I got quite a large amount of it, and I had wanted to work with leather for quite a while. I wasn't really wanted to work with real leather just because ethically. And the difference between this and obviously real leather is obviously it's classed as vegan leather. It hasn't got as many, it's not purely plastic. So normally faux leathers are a form of plastic. You can have a look on Ultra Fabrics website and it lists what their different leathers are made from. But anyway, once I got hold of it, I wanted to play around with it, test it out. I quite like textiles. I rarely get much time to play around with textiles and make lots of little bits and bobs now. But I wanted to essentially play around with it, and when we went into lockdown, I started messing around with different samples, and I knew that they could be upcycled into bags. So I'll run you through where I sort of began with this. So I started making these little strips. So if I pull one of these out, so what I started to do, I don't know if you can see, I feel like a proper influencer now. I started with these little leather strips. So I was cutting the leather up into little bits and see if I could weave it, fold it, fuse it. I spent ages trying to kind of make something out of it, but they were either too thick, too bulky, wouldn't look clean. It's highly important to me for it to look like a high quality product. Like I want it to look, like there's no point in me making something that looks cheap. So there were a lot of different variations which kind of look alright, but I know for a fact that they couldn't be sold, they couldn't be manufactured. I quite liked the idea of this, so this was like another development where I started to sew over the top of the little strips. But as you can see, they're about half a centimetre, quarter of a centimetre, half a centimetre thick, so they're quite thick in themselves. So when you start weaving them together, you get quite a lot of bulk. So that was dismissed straight away. But I wanted that originally to be kind of one of the ways that they would be interwoven and then woven within themselves. But that, I mean, I still really like it. I keep it as a sample, but and I might find a way of utilizing it later on, but at the moment it doesn't make sense. I then started to, because I have an interest in accessories as it is, I obviously have an interest in things like Bottega Veneta, Loewe, and I started to think about how their iconic bags are made and manufactured, and how woven bags in themselves and the history behind that. So I started looking into basket bags and things like that. So these are some basket samples, which basically same sort of technique. So woven into strips and then woven into a basket. So it was woven around a mold, and then obviously you have the bottom on there. This sample isn't finished. Same with this sample here. So this is another sample, very similar, but I can talk you through the differences. So this one is woven and then it's sewn at different intersections, whereas this one is woven but then fused with like a adhesive in between the intersections. But this one didn't turn out, it wasn't as clean on the inside. And even when you line it, the bamboo silk will be compromised because of the fusing agent. And then with this one, it didn't hold its shape as much as I perhaps would have wanted it to. So I couldn't really progress with either. I did play around with a number of different samples after that, which were of a similar shape and design ethos, but I yet again shelved them because it just didn't make sense. I tried as much as I could to progress it into a product, but it then, I suppose, I decided that I get to a point where there's no point in developing any further at that moment in time. So I'll develop it as much as I can, or as fast as much as I can, into different variations. And if I can't see a realization of that idea, then I'll normally put it to the side and then think about it subconsciously while I'm working on something else, because I don't like to be sitting in stagnation while it's not doing anything. But after playing around with that a number of different times, I started to move on to different samples. So I started to play around with, yet again, fusing strips, but this time with lace. So I work with Sophie Hallett on a regular basis. They donate me their dead stock lace, and I'm very grateful for that again and again. I've worked with them, and I fused these, like, the lace between these leather strips. So yet again, playing around with that idea of not necessarily weaving, but that shape and what you can do with it. And I kind of fell in love with the harsh contrast between this really chunky, thick leather and this very delicate chantilly lace, which most people would would avoid because it's quite a contrast. I then mocked up a little sample of how this is an unfinished sample though, so it's got no back to it, so it's not fused. It's just the lace, and then you've got the leather, which is kind of like placed on top. Part fused, then hand sewn in places, and then machine sewn before the eyelets are added at the intersections. So there's a vast amount of craft that goes into that. That sample in itself, I remember taking about 4 or 5 hours just to make sure it was like good enough, and that was yet again just a sample because I wasn't sure what to do with that. I then tried to do it on a larger scale, and you can see this is probably one of my worst samples. I normally wouldn't show this, but like not even in development, but it's quite chunky. So basically I started to weave the sections in and across themselves, but because the leather itself was quite chunky as it was, it then became almost impossible at the cross sections. So should I want to add metalwork or an eyelet or some form of I suppose textile on top of that, it would have become near impossible. The only bonus to this was it did hold its shape by itself. It didn't need any reinforcing. But I shortly shelved that one afterwards because it just didn't make sense, because it just didn't look as clean as you would want, because I don't know whether you can see, but you kind of get these like ridges where it's a bit, the layered leather doesn't look as finessed as I might want it to. So I went back to this sample and then began to kind of like fuse it with the strips of leather in between to create, which then you ended up with this final piece. It's stuffed with a bit of canvas at the moment, but basically you've got this finished textile. So you've got these, you can see the development from that small sample into this kind of revolving textile, which makes sense as a solid design. And then obviously on top of that, the metal is added, and then it's lined with the bamboo silk yet again. So, which is why inside I did like the idea of being able to see through the bag, seeing through the lace, but it obviously does need some sort of reinforcement. I didn't want too much bulk to it. So by using the bamboo silk inside, you still get the contrast between the chantilly lace and the background colour, but then you get the harshness of the leather, but it's not too thick. It still holds as like its own entity. Obviously these bits here would normally come up with the handle. So that kind of explains, but I formulated that was, I suppose, the development that I came to before I went back to thinking about this. So once I'd formed this sample and realised that I don't actually need to, I was making it more complicated for myself than I needed it to be by fusing two sides of leather, I realised that I could probably line this with a bamboo silk similarly, and have the raw side of the leather on the inside without having it backed. And that allowed me to produce this at a more lightweight, more commercial scale, I suppose. So these are strips. So what I did is I took the strips of leather, and instead of folding them over and fusing them, I then overlocked, a very fine overlock at the edges, and then these are then interwoven into themselves before being cut into the pattern pieces. And the bag is simply a very, very, very simple shape. So this is something I made, is very, very primitive, kind of basic baguette shape. This obviously hasn't got a bottom to it, hasn't got anything to it, but that dictated the dimensions, because by making this very, very simple, like 5-minute sample, I was able to place it under the arm and see how it looked, I suppose, in scale, because I grew up infatuated with like the Dior saddlebag and all those sort of bags that sit just under the shoulder, and under the arm, and I wanted to create that same scale to it, I suppose, and that allowed me to formulate this design. But I mean, the textile for this in itself, really you want to spend a day doing that. If you start in the morning to get a finished textile cut out, fused in those panels, it will probably take about a day to make that. And then the bottom of this, so the bottom leather panel is actually hand sewn, so it's part machine, part hand, but this is, the bottom piece is, there's like a reinforced board inside, then the leather is stretched and fused to the board with an adhesive before the feet are then pierced through, and then it's fused to the main base of the bag before being hand sewn, and the bottom is the holes are punctured this before the holes are punctured on the bottom, and then it's hand sewn onto it. So there's a lot of craft that goes into this basically, but as you can see, there are a lot of different variations that went into the process of making these bags. I mean, some of the other bags, so this is a random textile which I didn't actually utilise in any sort of bag, and it's basically just a little kind of like textile that gathers the leather in certain places. Absolutely adore this. I'm thinking about including it in something else, but it's just so chunky, so even though it's great, it was shelved from the bag design. Similarly, in some of the other bags, we've got these little tests, so I've tested little buckles, that would have taken about half an hour to make. Similarly, little samples on this, because absolutely everything had to be right. While I obviously have only got a small selection of different samples here, for each one of these there was probably about 5 or 6 different variations, different sizes before the final, I suppose, bag was produced. I normally keep a large amount of them, but it doesn't make sense always to utilise, and sometimes I upcycle certain samples into other tests and toiles, so they kind of get lost in the process, but this is what I could salvage as it is at the moment. You can see the full collection of all the bags over on Rature, and on my website as well, which will detail all of them, and you'll be able to kind of understand, hopefully in a bit more detail, how these pieces came to be. And obviously I've used this as a way of explaining how much detail goes and how much depth goes into developing a design, because you can apply, I suppose, the knowledge of how many samples I produce to my previous collection. Similarly, for one design there could be 10 to 15 different samples. For my tailored pieces, there are normally about 20 different toiles before I get a finished fit, because I want it to fit like an Elia, like I want it to fit perfectly, so it has to be perfect. And that essentially is a mini design development thing. I know I've had a lot of comments, so I'm just going to lean over and have a little look and see what's what on here, because I'm going to see whether there was any specific questions. as I said, after this, please answer the source of the waste leather. Yeah, so basically this is, so I don't know whether you asked that before or after, but basically I source my dead stock leather, vegan leather, from Ultra Fabrics. If you search Ultra Fabrics on Google or go onto the website, it details what each of their vegan leathers are produced from. I know that this vegan leather is fireproof, which is quite a nice touch, which a lot of synthetic leathers don't have, because normally they're made out of plastic, which makes them highly flammable. And obviously, when you're considering alternatives to leather, you can consider things like pineapple leather. There are lots of different alternatives, really, but it just depends on what you're looking for. But I normally find I know it's a continuous debate as whether faux leather or real leather is better, but based on studies, as far as I'm aware, faux leather is better in the long run, as long as it's of high quality and can last, because the amount of greenhouse gases that are emitted from the production of real leather are far greater than that of faux leather. And also, real leather is normally treated with some sort of plastic or chemical anyway. So there's really not much debate in it for me. I'd rather use this or none at all. I'm just going to have a little look, see what else we've got. Okay, right. I am going to round up on that, but I'm going to go into a number of the questions because there were quite a few questions. You're more than welcome to drop questions in the comments below. And as I said on TikTok, if you drop further questions post this live on my TikTok or on my Instagram, I will probably get back to you. I will get back to you as soon as possible, really. Because I'm happy to have continuous discussion. Also, if you don't agree with some of my viewpoints, or you think that I'm doing something wrong, or you've got suggestions for how I can work better, I always appreciate people emailing or DMing me with suggestions on what I can do better, because no one is perfect. So I wanted to do a quick Q&A about upcycling in general, so I might loop back into this, these designs for examples, but I had a number of different questions. I've kept them all anonymous because some were anonymous, some were not, and it was just better to keep it concisely anonymous. So I'll start with the simple ones, which were kind of like, what is upcycling and what is the definition of upcycling? So upcycling is essentially the reuse of otherwise discarded materials to create something that's higher quality than the original, so to extend its life cycle. That can be extending the life cycle of a garment, so you could take a garment apart and take pieces of it and upcycle that into something new, or you can upcycle dead stock fabric, as I do, into new pieces that then can be utilised. But it's essentially extending the life cycle of something that would otherwise go to landfill. Similar sort of like basic questions. So is upcycling a new way of working? No. I think over the last few years, and especially now, many more people are seeing the potential of upcycling, and many companies are seeing it as through a commercial lens, so they can see the profitability of upcycling. But obviously, upcycling isn't anything new. We're kind of living in a period where we're reversing the consumer attitudes of the last 20 to 30 years, because throughout the 80s and 90s we've been pushed to buy more and more product. But if you think back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, like the average person would be taught in school to mend and repair and extend the life cycle of certain pieces. You would have people that would upcycle curtains into a shirt and nets into a like lace nets into a blouse. You would extend whatever you had. You would extend it. People didn't have a lot of money, or the vast majority of people didn't have a lot of money to keep buying clothes, so you would make do with what you had, and you would upcycle or revitalize pieces into something new. So no, upcycling isn't anything new. I think the way people are working around it at the moment is potentially a new outlook or a new perspective. So especially working with dead stock, so this sort of stuff would have normally, like this sort of fabric would have normally just gone to waste, because it's a burden on the company that produced it, that once it gone, that isn't there to use it anymore. But upcycling in general isn't new at all. Something really interesting is someone asked what the difference between upcycling and recycling is, and I had to think about this properly to get a concise answer myself. And the best way to describe it is kind of the 3 R's. So what you're taught from school. So reduce, reuse, recycle. And you've got to think about that in that specific order, because you're encouraged to reuse or reutilize something before you recycle it. and it's in that order for a specific reason, because the word upcycling insinuates being something being upgraded, whereas recycling is normally synonymous with something being downgraded, so it's downcycling essentially, or that could be a synonymous term. Recycling often involves breaking down the raw material, so you break it down into so like think like plastics. So when bottles are recycled, it's broken down into pellets, which is then mixed in with virgin fibre before it's formed into a new version of itself. But obviously that consumes energy and resources, and isn't necessarily best use of the original material. And also there are normally chemicals involved in the recycling process, which can make it harder to break down long term. So when you recycle something and it's broken down, mixed with the virgin fibre to make something new, the chemicals that are involved in that can potentially make it harder to recycle that going forth. And like that can be, even though I've used the example of plastic bottle, that can be applied to materials that are shredded and then remade into new materials. It would make much more sense to just reuse the material as it was in its original state than to break it down, mix it and blend it and make it harder to recycle in the long run. So upcycling is kind of more efficient way, is more efficient instead of materials being broken down. Am I telling you to not recycle? No. Recycle, please. But I think it's about being conscious of and considerate of your impact. So if say you have, like if you have a pair of jeans that you no longer wear, try and make them into something new. Do you know what I mean? Cut them up, use the raw denim to patchwork into something new, rather than throw them away. So yeah, I think it's just about being considerate. But that was kind of I thought that was quite interesting, the difference between upcycling and recycling, that you should reuse something before you think about recycling, and recycling isn't necessarily your get out of jail free card. So yeah, that's that. I think that answers that one in summary. What other questions did I have? Is upcycling important? Yes. Because the idea of recycling alone, reducing and recycling alone, is not necessarily going to solve the problem that we have at the moment. Because we've been talking, like, I say this all the time, I take part in a number of different talks all the time, and I end up talking about the same stuff again and again and again. And I'm very aware that people, we've been talking about recycling, reducing, and being considerate for years, tens of years. Things that I started talking about when I started doing all of this, I'm still talking about today. And that's can be applied to designers that have been talking about this for 30 years. So, and I mean, looking at statistics from last year, like even last year, companies like Pretty Little Thing, they still made a profit. They still turned a profit even though we were sitting at home. No one was going anywhere, and they still turned a profit. So people are still consuming, even when they don't have the option to go out and consume. And I did find some statistics for this. So according to the Times in 2018, Britain's binned around £12.5 billion worth of clothing, which equates to 300,000 tons of textiles in landfill. And I think that in itself kind of tells a story and kind of explains why upcycling is important, and important alongside other methods of reducing how we consume. Because most of that would have been perfectly wearable, perfectly usable pieces, and it's normally just people changing their clothing and changing their wardrobe season on season. And if you're buying something that requires disposal within a year of buying it, I would argue that's not a very sensible use of your money or resources, or the clothing in itself, because you should be buying pieces that are made to last. We shouldn't be throwing away, but we've got to this culture where it's perfectly normal, and I'm seeing it a lot on TikTok, because I guess that's a good microcosm of wider society, or what a younger attitude towards buying. And people will buy things for just once wear, or 3 times, and then they're used to just throwing it away. And it's like they'll buy a top or a vest, and they're like, oh yeah, that's got 3 uses, and then we'll throw it away. And it's kind of a joke, and like it's not a joke at all. And I fully understand that the 3 use is very serious, but it's like that shouldn't have even been produced if it wasn't made to last. So I think you need to buy well, make it last, and make sure it's of good quality. And then obviously, if it's of good quality, it can be recycled or upcycled into something new at the end of life cycle. and that's why upcycling is important. How can I buy into? Someone asked, how can I buy into a sustainable wardrobe on a small budget? And I talked about this quite a lot recently. I quite like talking about this. So I think Ursula said, she said many times that the most sustainable clothing you own is what you already have in your wardrobe. So what you already have that is your way of being sustainable. Stop purchasing and look at what you've got and reuse, restyle what you already have. But being responsible, and I understand what they meant about this, because they talked about how expensive, I suppose, sustainable clothing is. And I find this quite interesting because it's a complex discussion, and I don't think being responsible or having a sustainable wardrobe should be a matter of class warfare. Because I understand it's a complex discussion. I understand why someone would buy high street, or why someone would buy Pretty Little Thing, because the prices are not only enticing, but some people just don't have enormous amounts of money to spend hundreds of pounds on pieces of clothing, and I fully understand that. I come from a working class background, but so I've made, I've said before, I've made top man jeans last 10 years. Do you know what I mean? It's just about your attitude towards that. You can buy high street pieces that are well made, and then you just make them last. You just kind of need to just change your attitude. But I also understand, on the other hand, why some pieces cost so much, because like I was talking about these different pieces here, and how many samples and how many variations and test versions they went through before I got to the final product. That's a long time. And to turn a profit, you need to account lots of different things into that. You need to account that sampling process, as well as the raw materials that you use and the time it makes to make the finished product. You need to include the amount of time that it took to come to that final product. So I understand why something might be really expensive, but it's kind of finding the middle ground between the two. So when you're buying high street, make sure you're buying it to last, and make sure you're not consuming pieces like dresses that cost £7 that you plan on throwing away at the end of the night. Buy a dress that's, I don't know, £30 from a more expensive high street shop that's made better and will last a little longer. Or failing that, if you spend, say, 30 quid on a top every month or a piece of clothing every month, imagine if you didn't spend that 30 quid and you saved it for like 3 months, you'd have 90 quid, which is enough to buy a low value, high end piece of designer clothing. So, and that is normally made to last. So it's about shifting attitudes on both sides. I think that kind of answers that question. So essentially, but the most sustainable thing you can do is wear what you already have. Because there's no point in going out and buying a whole new wardrobe of sustainable designers, just for clout, just to say that you've got a responsible or considerate wardrobe. I'm aware that I've got quite a few comments, so I'm just going to look, see what people have said. When you upcycle, there's more of a limit on. When you upcycle, there's more of a limit materials, fabric, so you'll probably only be able to make a few pieces. Do you think this works? Market having more individual pieces works as a market having more. Yeah, this is something that actually someone else asked, and I've got some notes on, but I'll ask you a question more directly. So upcycling can limit, doesn't always, can limit how much you can make, what you can make, because of the amount of dead stock that you do have. So like I said, with this, I can make a decent amount out of the leather because I was donated quite a significant amount of that, and obviously that was because it was from a direct fabric supplier. But I do have friends, and I know of designers that do purchase dead stock off places like eBay and through like second-hand markets, as opposed to going directly to the fabric manufacturer, and therefore they're only able to make, I don't know, like 2 or 3 pieces out of that piece of fabric. But I quite like that. I don't think it's anything strange. I think, yet again, it's just shifting consumer attitudes. So it's shifting the way that we consume clothing. Because if you're not consuming clothing at the same rate that we are at the moment, you won't need to be buying new pieces all the time, which means there won't be as much of a demand for, I don't know, like 100 of the same type of dress. It will be perfectly viable for a place to sell 4 versions of one look, and that's it. Do you know what I mean? Because also, if you take it from another angle, we're living in a period where most things have already been done. We're living in like the remix. Do you know what I mean? We're wearing a clash of different silhouettes, a clash of different pieces from decades previously. shopping has never been so popular. So I don't think this. So the idea of trends kind of flies out the window, which then makes it more viable for a company to produce smaller quantities of limited designs, because they're not looking to impact the market on a grand scale. They're looking to produce high quality products on a smaller scale. I hope that answers your question a bit more directly. Best advice for final year students wanting to work with sustainability within the industry. How important is your college portfolio for this? This is quite interesting, because I was I think I was the only one in my year. There were only a couple of people that did consider sustainability, and this is going back like 2 years now, and it was not necessarily advised, which I find crazy now. And when I say it, it sounds crazy. Because I knew that I wanted to create pieces, and I think I've achieved that, and I do achieve that when with everything I make pieces that don't look like sustainable clothing. I fully understand that there's a market for pieces that look like they're made of hemp and look very natural, and very raw, but that's not necessarily my design ethos. I'm not looking to make pieces that look very earthy. I want them to look like high-end designer pieces, because that's what I've grown up adoring, with people like McQueen, Galliano, JPG, Alaya, like all of these pieces, all of these designers that I have an appreciation for, but I see no reason why you can't make that same sort of aesthetic, that same sort of desirable high-end product without considering sustainability. I think you can, but it just takes a little more work. So I think most universities now encourage students to be sustainable, or consider sustainability. And I think that you've got to remember that you're right at the beginning of it, and you're not going to know everything. And I don't even know everything, and people that have been working in this industry for like 20 years don't know everything. I think problems occur when you start trying to be the perfect person or the perfect designer, because you're stressing over trying to tick all these boxes. Work out what works for you or what you want to focus on, because there are lots of different elements of it. With being a conscious designer or a sustainable designer, there are lots of ways you can go about it. So kind of find your angle, find what you want to focus on, and you want your, I suppose, brand to focus on, and then go from there. So like for me, utilizing upcycled dead stock was a really good way of me incorporating sustainability within the aesthetic that I wanted to achieve. And along the way, over the last few years, I've been able to build up relationships with fabric manufacturers that are more conscious. So I purchased my bamboo silk from the same supplier again and again and again, because it's got a number of different sustainable certifications which are outlined on their website at point of purchase. And I've asked them for certificates to back up that, and they've been able to provide it. Similarly, recently I've just got in touch with a British wool manufacturer who was able to give me the largest amount of information about their fabric that I've ever received. And it was an enormous document which outlined everything they do that makes them more responsible in terms of their production. So I think, and through forming these relationships, you're able to be more transparent with the consumer about what you're making, how you've made it, and I think that's the most important thing. I think the most important thing is to be transparent about what you're doing, because you can't make, like, to be sustainable will be to make nothing. So if you're a student going into this wanting to be a sustainable designer, I would just start to be more open with what you're making it from, where you're getting it from, and build upon that. And then when you're buying fabrics, ask more questions than you would usually. Where is it made? Who's it made by? Who made this fabric? What's the supply chain like? How much of the work is being paid? Do you know what I mean? Think about all of these things, and through doing that, you learn what you should and shouldn't be doing, and you form a good base to continue as a sustainable designer later on. I hope that answers your question. So yeah, for a final year student at university, I wouldn't stress too much. I would maybe just I wouldn't stress too much about being this perfect sustainable designer. I would maybe find a ground base and then go from there. Jumping from that, actually, I might talk about this. So someone asked me who my favourite, I suppose, upcyclers are, or like upcycled designers are, and I find that there are, well, as I kind of discussed earlier, there are a lot of people that do now upcycle within their design. I won't be able to list off everyone, so if you are a designer friend that I have not listed, then please don't be offended, because there are only a few. There are a few that came to mind this morning that I'm really liking at the moment, and it probably is just because I've been seeing their work a bit more on my feed. So obviously Adam Jones makes pieces out of upcycled beer mats and kind of those sort of materials. Really cool. I'm sure most of you already know about him. Fanula Butterfield, who goes under Fanula Bell, I think. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Makes the most beautiful corsets out of dead stock fabric. And she fits into that category of people that, as far as I'm aware, purchases dead stock fabric from places like eBay, Depop. But she makes the most beautiful corsets. You should go and have a little look at that. Patrick, who was on previously, so obviously he's been a great example for me. To see I guess examples of best practice. Specifically, you should probably look at his collaboration with Pinko. A couple more, I suppose, companies which I quite like, or the work I quite like more so the way they work. So Benjamin Ben Moyal, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, makes clothing out of cassette tapes. I think it's fascinating. It's kind of like woven. They're like woven together. You should go and check him out. And then Elvis and Cress, which make bags from upcycled fire hoses, which I'm sure a lot of you have probably already seen or heard about. I know there was a lot of press like a year ago. I'm obsessed with them just because they're very simple, high-end staples that look fantastic. So yeah, I guess that's a good list of some sustainable designers, but obviously there are far more. I normally, through just social media and through my writing, I normally try to advocate for different people and talk about different people, and if someone's doing something cool, I normally try and repost, reshare that. So I guess just keep an eye out in general. And if you have, can you mention these names in your feed? Oh, here. Yeah, what I'll do is I'll probably put them on my story. I'll try and do that later, or I'll put them in the comment section. But I'll put them somewhere, but they're fantastic. But other than that, you could just go through the people I follow. There are I follow a large number of designers and sustainable designers. And if you still have more questions, you can drop me a DM or pop in the comment section afterwards. Because I'm also aware that there'll be quite a few people that will watch this once it's pre-recorded. So if you just drop in the comments, and I will reply with different bits and bobs. So another question, do you think upcycling becoming a mainstream form of production is a problem? No, and yes. But I will explain that because it's complex yet again. So I'll break it down. No, I don't think it is a problem because we have surplus stock. There's a large amount of surplus stock. It needs utilising, and it's better that it's utilised and used and made into something that's going to be used and something of high quality, something that has a purpose, because there is no point in fabric sitting around in warehouses. There's no point in fabric being perfectly good fabric being thrown away to landfill. Similarly with garments that are pre-existing, there's no point in them sitting on a rail if they're not going to be used, or sitting in a warehouse or sitting in landfill if they're not going to be used or worn when they are perfectly fine to do so. So no, I don't think it's a problem from that perspective. But the reason I say it, yes, it is not a hard yes, but it's more it could become a problem the more mainstream it becomes. And I see this from seeing, I suppose, more ad hoc versions of upcycling through TikTok, YouTube, social media, people that are doing bits and bobs ad hoc. Not as I can see how it will become a problem, because I'm seeing people that are taking perfectly good pieces of clothing or perfectly good fabric and making it into poor quality or poorly manufactured items. And in my opinion, that is a hindrance more than a help. So because you can say that you're upcycling, take fabric and make it into, I don't know, 100 tops, 100 bustiers, 100 pairs of trousers. But if they're not well made, then what is the point in doing so? Do you know what I mean? Like, if you're going to take, because that fabric started as perfectly good usable fabric, and if you make that into product that's then only going to last like 2 weeks, it really doesn't make sense there, because you're the person that's putting that fabric into landfill. Because once that item is sold, worn for like those 2 weeks, and it breaks down, most people won't know to, or won't want to, fix it or upcycle it into something new themselves, so they'll just throw it away. And that's where the problem lies. So as it becomes more mainstream to upcycle, to revitalize pieces of clothing, I think it could become a problem if people aren't considering the start and end product with longevity in mind. So another example is perhaps when people go to the charity shops, they take perfectly good large t-shirts or large shirts, and they crop them beyond repair. And while that looks great for them that summer, they then don't wear that shirt again, and that what was a perfectly good shirt that could be worn and bought from that charity shop by someone of that size is then not able to be worn. Do you know what I mean? I hope that makes sense. So yeah, I think most for most of the time, no, I don't think it's a problem that upcycling is becoming a mainstream form of production, especially if you're a company. I think that's great. But I think the problem lies in individuals that aren't considering the longevity of the end product. I hope that makes some sort of sense. So a couple of people asked, where do I get my fabric from? So my fabric, most of my pieces, as you'll see from my collection, it's kind of 50-50. So some of it is dead stock from places like Ultra Fabrics, Swarovski, Sophie Hallett. I have good relationships with different companies now that donate me their dead stock fabric and materials that I'm then able to upcycle into new pieces. I then also use organic fabrics, more natural fabrics, so bamboo silks, certified yarns, sustainably certified yarns. So, and like I was talking about the wool supply that I'm in conversation with at the moment, that's important to me because it's companies that have the documentation to prove that they're being responsible about how they produce the fibres, and then I can utilise those also. And then failing that, I do use fibres that there is no sustainable alternative of. There's no dead stock available, because it's a 50. You need to find a balance between what you're going to make and your craft and being responsible. So a good example of that is there are a couple of pieces that I've made using crin. You can only get polyester crin or horsehair crin. Horsehair crin doesn't really sit with me because ethically, it's production. Also, you can't manufacture on a larger width. So polyester crin I have used a couple of times, and I'm not going to feel like I sinned for doing so. If a sustainable alternative is available, then I will utilise that and I'll integrate that into my design. But at the moment, that is what I have to use. I use it on small quantities anyway, so my impact is very small. And like I've said before, normally if I'm working with something and someone else has a suggestion, I quite appreciate it when people email me or DM me with suggestions of companies or materials that I should use, because like I said, going back to the conversation about how graduates can get into, or design students can get into being a sustainable designer, it is very much about learning. Like, you won't know everything, so you use what you've got and you do as best as you can, and then you will learn through this interconnected community. Hope that kind of answers that one. One of the last questions, which kind of I think I sort of answered earlier, is how do you make a profit? How do you make a profit from sustainable design, like sustainable pieces and upcycling? Because obviously upcycled materials is dead stock, so there is always a limit to how much you have, and I think it is just about working out where you sit, what you're making. I don't make thousands of pieces, and most sustainable designers I know don't make on large quantities because it doesn't make sense. You've got to think about the start and end goal. I make pieces on small quantity from this dead stock, and that means that I'm able to utilise the dead stock to its best ability. I'm able to make these really beautiful pieces and then sell them on a limited availability. And that's how I work. And obviously, normally you work your pricing strategy around how much you make, how many pieces you make, and the cost of production. So you kind of balance it out from that. I think if you're wanting to make thousands of pieces of clothing, you firstly need to reassess what you're doing. But I think if you want to make thousands of pieces of clothing and you want upcycling or using dead stock to be your get out of jail free card, I think you're going about everything from the wrong perspective or from the wrong angle. I think the more you start considering how pieces are made, what they're made from, what you can reutilize, and how much you're making of that, I think once you start with that mentality, you can't really go back. So I would find it very difficult to sign a contract to make hundreds of pieces for a company, because in my mind that does not make sense. It doesn't make sense to make thousands of pieces of one design to be sold, because I know that that's just manufacturing into the system of over consumerism, I suppose. I think that kind of rounds up the main bulk of the question. I have quite a few different ones there, but I'm just going to look. Does anyone have any questions that they want to ask about upcycling? Kind of anything I've discussed, anything that they're interested in. As I said, you can drop me a DM, email me on TikTok if you write in the comment section any questions you have, and I'll do quick 1-minute video responses. Likewise, once this goes up as a recorded video, you can drop questions, comments in the little comment section, and I'll get back as soon as possible. If you want to see the full collection of all of the bags, if you head to Ritual's website, if you want to see my most recent collection, you can go to London Fashion Week website under Joshua James Small, or you can go to my website, which I think is currently being refurbished, so it will be live at some point very soon. Where are my pearls from? These are Swarovski. These are actually dead stock. I will probably reutilize. I probably won't have this for very long, and I'll reutilize this into like a piece. But because when you get the pearls, they're on a string, and I just quite like them as they are. I love that. That's my end question. I hope this was semi-interesting. I hope that this, I suppose, gave a better insight into how my pieces were made. I don't normally show off too many of my samples, or too much of the behind-the-scenes sort of thing, because I get so caught up in doing the final product, and then once the final product is out, I'm on to the next. And I hope those questions have kind of answered any queries you had about upcycling. And how it works, how I work as a designer. I am not sure what is on after me. I know there's another event at 6, and there's quite a few different events this evening, but I hope that helps. I've got a couple of questions. How do you approach people? Very humanely. Don't go into it thinking that you're it's normally a simple conversation. I find that it's through, unfortunately, getting to know people in certain companies is a case of who you know, but it doesn't need to be like this hierarchy. You can simply start with some random person asking people. The sustainable community is very interconnected. So like I said, going back many years, didn't have really a clue where to start. So I knew that a couple of my friends were doing bits and bobs, including Patrick, who was on previously. So I just asked questions. It's the best thing to do is just ask lots of questions. Ask, where do you get your fabric from? Where do you supply this from? And if you know of certain companies that you are interested in, and you want to know more about how they produce their fabric, just email them. Best thing to do is just go onto the website, go onto their about. They'll have a general contact. They will get back to you. And just say that you're interested in purchasing this fabric. Can you tell me more about this? Or if you're interested, or I'm interested in this fabric, do you have any dead stock? It depends on the company. Obviously, a lot of places are more savvy to the fact that, or more aware of the fact that people are utilising this dead stock into really good quality product. So it's about creating good relationships with the brands, but it normally starts with a simple question, like just a simple, humane, like it could be a DM, it could be an email, but just ask them genuinely, show interest in their product. You've got to be genuinely interested in what they're producing, so whatever fabric it is you're interested in, whatever companies it is, show interest and just ask questions. That is the simple answer. Essentially, there's no right or wrong way to approach companies about dead stock fabric, or even about finding out more about their fabrics. What's the ratio of people accepting and buying recycled? I do not know the ratio of people accepting or buying, but I know from my perspective that people are much more aware of consuming responsibly. So even my friends that are outside of fashion are much more interested in purchasing from companies, smaller companies, local companies, companies that make things in-house that are on a small scale. And for a large number of those companies, they'll be produced with dead stock. So I know that people are aware and are wanting to purchase into that, but I think it's just a change of habits. We also need to make sure that doesn't, like, there will be at some point there will be no more dead stock to use, because companies that produce the fabrics will be more responsible about the amounts that they do produce. So it's a continuous shift. But I think people are much more interested in doing that. I've had a couple of tablecloths. I've had a couple. Have someone using tablecloths? No, tablecloths. You could utilize that into something. You can make a decent couple of shirts out of that. When you look for dead stock, do you keep yourself growing? Yeah, when you look for dead stock, you need to kind of know what you're looking for. So specifically with this vegan leather, I knew for months previously, when I was coming up with the kind of like what I wanted. I was thinking about what I wanted to be making, and where my new collection was going, and what I wanted to be producing, and I knew that I wanted to work with leather. I then outruled using cowhide or animal skin. So I knew that I wanted to use an alternative to that, and then started to research into what I could use. I did consider places like Pinatex, which is a fantastic company that makes like alternatives out of pineapple leather, but that just wasn't for me, just because of for the aesthetic that it was, which is great in its own right. It wasn't right for the products or the pieces that I wanted to produce. And then through conversation, I was able to find out about Ultra Fabrics, which I was vaguely aware of before, but didn't know too much about. And then from talking to people, someone recommended that I then get in touch with, looped me in on an email with someone that worked for the company. And then I began a very organic conversation saying, hey, I'm interested in making some pieces out of vegan leather. What do you have in terms of dead stock, and would you be able to provide dead stock? And then the conversation progresses from there. So it's very organic. But I think you do need to know what you're going in for. So with the bamboo silks that I use, I obviously use virgin fiber bamboo silk, because it's produced by a supplier which I trust, which has all the sustainability certifications for the material that I buy, and then it makes sense to purchase it into that, because it's a sustainable method of producing fabric. Is a more responsible way. If I could get hold, I do use dead stock silks sometimes if I can get hold of them, but because obviously sometimes I work with silks quite a lot. I need to have a reliable way of sourcing that. So by using a sustainable supplier, or a supplier that's got that's transparent about how it produces, in combination with using dead stock, I think that's a good balance. But yeah, you need to know what you're kind of looking for when you're looking for dead stock. Right, I have got about like a couple of minutes, so if anyone has any questions, they can drop them in the comment section now. Otherwise, I will round this up. I hope this has been informative. I feel like I started it rambling a little bit, but I hope it's kind of given a better insight into what I do, how I make things, and the whole process of upcycling, because upcycling is incredibly important to my brand ethos, how it works, and what I work with. Yeah, it's really good. Talking of I'll just respond to that. So in terms of graduates, and going back to what we were talking about, design students getting involved. Obviously, if you get in touch with the people like the BFC, the British Fashion Council, because I know that they've just started an initiative where designers are kind of looped in with different universities, and then the designer dead stock is then redistributed to those universities, to the students. But definitely go out of your way. So even though your university might be encouraging you to upcycle, to recycle, to be more sustainably minded, go out of your way outside of the institution of the university and contact companies separately, because it's really good for you to create that organic relationship with them. I think that rounds everything up. Right, I am going to summarise. Thank you so much for for tuning in. Like I said, you can go to Retort to have a look at the bags, which are on sale now. You can go to my website or the London Fashion Week website to have a look at my most recent collection, and see all of the pieces. Or on my Instagram and on my website have all of the components of all of the garments listed, so you can gain a better insight into each piece and what it's made from. I suppose relate it back to this conversation about different fabrics and fibres and upcycling in general. I hope it's been quite informative. Have a look back on the Fashion Open Studio website, because there's a number of different events today, I think, for the next few hours, and then there are events all the way through the week. I'll definitely be tuning in to quite a few, and it would be cool if you could too. And obviously, just in general, just be more considerate of what you're buying, what you're making, what you're purchasing into. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great day and stay groovy.